There is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things.
In this unfolding royal drama, a discovery buried deep within palace archives has triggered a decision that will redefine the monarchy's future and Prince Andrew's fate. What started as a routine financial review quickly spiraled into a revelation powerful enough to shake the crown at its core. Now, with hidden records exposed and long-buried questions finally brought into the light, King Charles faces a moment unlike any before. This turning point isn't just administrative, it's personal, explosive, and destined to alter the royal family's path forever. And for Andrew, it marks the most pivotal chapter of his journey yet: the weight of silence. The sun rose over Buckingham Palace like it did every morning. The golden light touched the stone walls and made the windows shine. Everything looked perfect. The gardens were neat and green. The guards stood tall and still. Inside the grand halls, servants moved quietly from room to room. Their footsteps made no sound on the thick carpets. Every painting hung straight on the walls. Every piece of furniture sat exactly where it belonged. The palace looked like a picture in a storybook, but something felt different that morning. Something felt wrong. King Charles woke up early as always. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of his bedroom. He had slept poorly. Strange dreams had troubled him all night. Now, in the soft morning light, he could not remember what those dreams were about, but the feeling stayed with him. It wrapped around his chest like a heavy blanket. He sat up slowly and looked around his room. Everything was in its place. His robe hung on the chair. His slippers waited by the bed, yet nothing felt quite right. He dressed himself carefully. His hands moved through the familiar routine. Button after button, tie carefully knotted, jacket smoothed down. He looked in the mirror and saw a king staring back at him. But the man in the mirror looked tired. Worried lines creased his forehead. His eyes seemed distant, like they were searching for something far away. Charles tried to shake the feeling off. He had important work to do, meetings to attend, papers to sign, a whole country depending on him. But as he walked through the long corridors of the palace, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. The paintings of his ancestors watched him from their golden frames. Kings and queens from long ago. They all looked so certain, so sure of themselves. Charles wondered if they had ever felt this way, if they had ever woken up with their hearts beating too fast for no reason they could name, if they had ever sensed that their carefully ordered world was about to change. The servants greeted him with bows and curtsies. They spoke in quiet voices. Everything moved like clockwork. Breakfast appeared at the right time. The newspapers were folded just so. The morning schedule sat waiting on his desk. Charles went through the motions. He nodded at reports. He made notes on documents. But his mind kept drifting. Something nagged at the back of his thoughts. Something he could not quite catch or understand. Not far away, in a much quieter part of the kingdom, Prince Andrew woke up too. His home was smaller than the Grand Palace, but still impressive, still royal. But Andrew lived a different life now. He stayed away from the public eye. His days followed the same pattern over and over. Wake up, read the papers, take a walk, eat meals alone or with very few people. The routine was safe, predictable, boring perhaps, but safe. Andrew moved through his morning like a man walking through fog. He kept to himself, spoke little. His face showed nothing of what he thought or felt, but inside something churned. Old memories he tried not to think about. Past choices that followed him like shadows. He had made mistakes. Big ones. The kind that did not go away no matter how much time passed. The kind that made him nervous when the phone rang. The kind that made him wonder what people were saying about him when he was not there. He stood by his window and looked out at the grounds. Birds sang in the trees. Flowers bloomed in neat rows. Everything looked peaceful, but Andrew knew better than to trust peaceful moments. They never lasted. Something always came along to break the calm. Some old problem rising up from the past, some secret that refused to stay buried. He felt it coming now, that familiar tightness in his chest, that sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Back at the palace, Charles sat at his desk and tried to focus on his work, but the words on the pages blurred together. His mind would not settle. He felt like a sailor on a ship sensing a storm on the horizon. The sky might still be blue, the water might still be calm, but every instinct screamed that rough seas were coming. He just did not know from which direction. He did not know what form the storm would take. He only knew it was close, very close. The palace remained silent. The gardens stayed beautiful. The guards kept their posts. Everything looked exactly as it should. But beneath that perfect surface, tension coiled like a spring wound too tight. Two men, uncle and nephew, both royal, both connected by blood and duty, both carrying secrets and fears. Neither one knew that very soon everything would change. Neither one knew that the calm they lived in was about to shatter like glass. Stay with us to know what was about to happen. The file that should not exist. Sir Lionel Harbury had worked for the royal family for 32 years. He knew every corner of the palace administrative offices. He knew where every file cabinet stood. He knew which drawers stuck and which keys opened which locks. He had devoted his entire adult life to keeping the royal accounts in perfect order. Numbers were his language, ledgers were his books. He believed in precision, in honesty, in serving the crown with absolute loyalty. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Lionel arrived at his office before sunrise. He hung his coat on the same hook he always used. He made himself a cup of tea in the same mug he had used for years. Then he sat down at his desk and began his work. The task seemed simple enough. The palace was updating its filing system. Old records needed to be reviewed and organized. Decades of documents sat in storage rooms gathering dust. Someone had to go through them all. Lionel did not mind. He actually enjoyed this kind of work. Looking through old papers felt like reading history. He could see how things changed over time, how money flowed through the royal household, how expenses grew and shrank with the years. It was all very orderly, very logical. Everything always added up perfectly. Until it did not. The first file he found seemed ordinary, just another folder tucked between hundreds of others in a cabinet marked with dates from 15 years ago. But something caught his eye, a number that looked odd. Not wrong exactly, just odd, out of place somehow. Lionel frowned and pulled the folder out. He set it on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were financial statements, transfer records, account summaries. Everything looked normal at first glance. But Lionel had spent 3 decades reading these documents. He knew what they should look like. These papers had something different about them. Small notes written in the margins, codes he did not recognize, references to accounts he had never seen before. His heart beat a little faster. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe just an old system they did not use anymore. Maybe a filing mistake from years ago, but his instinct said otherwise. His instinct told him to keep looking. He pulled out more files from the same cabinet, more folders with the same strange markings, the same odd codes, the same references to accounts that should not exist. Lionel carried an armful of papers back to his desk. He spread them out and began to study them carefully. His tea grew cold. He forgot to eat lunch. Hours passed as he pieced together what he was seeing. Then he found the locked drawer. It sat at the bottom of a different cabinet, a small drawer with a lock that looked newer than the rest. Lionel tried his master key. It did not fit. He tried other keys from his ring. Nothing worked. His hands trembled slightly as he searched for the right key. Finally, in a box of old duplicates, he found one that clicked into place. The drawer slid open. Inside were folders marked with dates and numbers, but these folders were different. They had been carefully hidden, deliberately separated from the regular files. Lionel lifted out the first one with hands that felt suddenly cold. He opened it and began to read. The words made his stomach drop. Offshore accounts, private transfers, money moving in patterns that made no sense for normal royal expenses, amounts that seemed too large, destinations that seemed too secretive, and connected to all of it, appearing again and again in the encrypted notes, was a name. Prince Andrew. Lionel sat back in his chair. His mouth felt dry. His mind raced through what he was seeing. These were not mistakes. These were not filing errors. Someone had created these accounts on purpose. Someone had moved money carefully and quietly. Someone had tried very hard to keep these transactions hidden from view. He spent the rest of the day going through every document, making notes, checking dates, following the trail of numbers from one account to another. The more he found, the worse it became. This was not just unusual. This was deeply wrong. Years of secret financial activity. Patterns that suggested something far more serious than simple poor judgment. As evening shadows filled his office, Lionel sat surrounded by papers. Evidence spread across his desk like pieces of a terrible puzzle. He felt sick. He felt angry. He felt betrayed, but most of all, he felt torn. He had served the royal family his entire career. He had taken his duty seriously. He had never questioned his loyalty. But now he held in his hands something that could destroy them, information that could tear the family apart, knowledge that once shared could never be taken back. Should he report this to King Charles? Should he bring this explosive discovery to the man who had just taken the throne? The man who already carried so much weight on his shoulders? The information involved his own uncle, his own blood. It would break his heart. It might break the entire monarchy. But could Lionel stay silent? Could he hide what he had found? Could he lock these files away and pretend he had never seen them? His conscience screamed no. His loyalty whispered yes. His duty demanded truth. His heart feared the consequences. Lionel looked at the papers one more time. The evidence was clear, undeniable, real. Whatever happened next, whatever choice he made, nothing would ever be the same again. The secret was out, at least to him. And secrets this big never stayed hidden for long. He reached for the phone, then stopped. His hand hovered in the air. One call would change everything. One call would start a storm that could not be stopped. What should he do? When loyalty demands truth. Sir Lionel stood outside the king's private study with the folder clutched against his chest. His palms were sweating. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. He had requested this meeting through the proper channels. The king's secretary had looked at him strangely when he insisted it was urgent and private. Now he waited, wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The door opened. King Charles stood there looking tired but alert. His eyes moved to the folder in Lionel's hands. Something in the older man's face must have alarmed him, because Charles stepped back and gestured for him to enter quickly. The door closed with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. They stood facing each other. Charles waited. Lionel tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. Finally, he held out the folder. Charles took it slowly. His fingers touched the worn edges. He looked at Lionel with a question in his eyes. Lionel found his voice. It came out rough and strained. He explained about the filing project, about the odd numbers, about the locked drawer, about what he had found inside. As he spoke, Charles opened the folder and began to read. His face changed with every page he turned. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief hardened into something darker. Charles moved to his desk without a word. He spread the papers across the polished wood. His hands moved from document to document, reading, checking dates, following the numbers just as Lionel had done. Minutes passed in heavy silence. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Outside the window, birds sang without care. Inside the study, the world seemed to be cracking apart. Finally, Charles looked up. His face had gone pale. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow. How long has this been going on? The question hung in the air. Lionel told him. Years, many years. The earliest documents went back over a decade, maybe longer. Charles stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. He walked to the window and stared out at the gardens. His hands clasped behind his back. His shoulders were rigid. Lionel watched him struggle with what he had learned. The king stood silent for so long that Lionel wondered if he should leave. Then Charles turned around. "Why did you bring this to him?" The question was not angry. It was sad, almost pleading. Lionel straightened his back. "Because it is the truth, Your Majesty. Because you deserve to know. Because my duty is to the crown, not to any one person." Charles walked slowly across the room, not pacing exactly, but moving as if staying still was impossible. His mind was clearly racing. Lionel could see the battle happening behind his eyes. The king was wrestling with terrible choices, family against duty, love against responsibility, the private man against the public role. "He is his uncle," Charles said quietly, almost to himself. "He is family. We have had our differences. We have disagreed, but this," his voice trailed off. He picked up one of the papers and stared at it as if willing the words to change, as if hoping this was all some awful dream. "Did anyone else see these files?" Charles asked suddenly. His voice was sharper now, more focused. Lionel shook his head. "No one, Your Majesty, only him. He brought them directly to him." Charles nodded slowly. That was good, that was important, but it did not solve the problem. The information existed, the truth was out, at least between the two of them. Charles sat down heavily in his chair. He looked older suddenly, more worn. The weight of the crown seemed to press down on him with crushing force. How could he not tell me? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. How could he hide this? How could he think this would never be discovered? Lionel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Some questions had no good answers. The king sat in silence for a long time. His fingers drummed on the desk, his jaw clenched and unclenched. Lionel watched him work through his thoughts, work through his emotions, work through the impossible situation that had just landed in his lap. This was not just about money. This was not just about hidden accounts. This was about trust, about honesty, about what it meant to be royal, about the difference between right and wrong. Finally, Charles looked up. His eyes were hard now, determined. The private man had stepped back. The king had stepped forward. He could not ignore this. He could not pretend it did not exist. He could not protect Andrew just because they shared blood. Too much was at stake. The integrity of the crown, the trust of the nation, the moral foundation of everything the monarchy stood for. Charles stood up. He walked to the door and opened it. His secretary appeared immediately. Charles spoke in a clear, firm voice. "Send word to Prince Andrew. Tell him I require his presence here immediately, not tomorrow, not next week, today, now." The secretary's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and hurried away. Charles closed the door and turned back to Lionel. The older man still stood where he had been, holding his ground, having done what duty demanded even though it cost him dearly. "Thank you," Charles said quietly, "for your loyalty, for your courage, for doing what was right even when it was hard." Lionel bowed his head. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for what was coming. Charles walked back to the desk and looked down at the scattered papers. Evidence of betrayal, proof of secrets, the kind of discovery that changed everything. He did not want to have the conversation that was coming. He did not want to face his uncle with these accusations, but he had no choice. The papers did not lie. The numbers did not deceive. The truth was clear and terrible. Outside, a car was already being prepared. A message was being delivered. Soon Andrew would arrive, unsuspecting, unprepared for what awaited him. The storm that had been building was about to break. The calm was over. The reckoning had begun. Keep watching to know what happened next. The unraveling. Prince Andrew arrived at Buckingham Palace within the hour. He walked through the familiar corridors with confusion written across his face. The message had been urgent but vague. His nephew needed to see him immediately. Andrew wondered what could be so important. Perhaps a family matter. Perhaps some royal duty he had forgotten about. He straightened his jacket and tried to look calm even though his stomach felt tight with nerves. A servant led him to the private study. The door opened. Andrew stepped inside and saw Charles standing by the window. The king did not turn around right away. That alone felt wrong. When Charles finally faced him, Andrew saw something in his expression that made his blood run cold. This was not going to be a pleasant conversation. "Sit down," Charles said. His voice was flat, controlled, too controlled. Andrew sat in the chair across from the desk. He tried to smile, but it felt false on his face. "What is this about?" he asked, attempting to sound casual. His voice came out higher than he intended. Charles did not answer. Instead, he walked to his desk and placed a folder in front of Andrew. "Open it," he said quietly. Andrew stared at the folder. His hands did not want to move. Slowly, as if reaching for something dangerous, he opened the cover. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get these?" The question came out sharp, almost angry. But underneath the anger was fear, raw and obvious. Charles sat down across from him. His eyes never left Andrew's face. "From our own archives. They have been there all along, waiting to be found." Andrew closed the folder quickly, as if shutting it would make the contents disappear. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. His words came fast now, rushed. "These are old records. Things are different now. Accounting practices have changed. You cannot just look at numbers from years ago and make assumptions." Charles leaned forward. "These are not assumptions. These are facts. Hidden accounts, offshore transfers, money moved in secret, all connected to you. Explain it to me." Andrew shifted in his chair, his fingers drummed on the armrest. "It was complicated," he said. "Financial matters are always complicated. There were legitimate reasons for everything, legal reasons." He spoke in circles, never quite saying anything concrete, never quite answering the actual question. Charles waited. His silence was more powerful than any accusation. It pressed down on Andrew like a weight. The younger man kept talking, filling the quiet with words that meant nothing. Justifications that did not justify. Explanations that did not explain. "Stop!" Charles said finally. His voice cut through Andrew's rambling like a knife. "Stop talking around the truth. He is not a fool. He can read these documents. He can follow the money trail. He wants him to tell him plainly. Why did he hide these accounts? Andrew's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish gasping for air. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape route. There was none. He was trapped, cornered. The walls were closing in. He needed security, he said finally. His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. You do not understand what it is like. Being in this family but not being important, not being the heir, not being the one everyone cares about. He needed to protect himself, to have something of his own. Charles's expression hardened. So you lied? You hid money? You created secret accounts that nobody knew about? That is your idea of security? Andrew stood up suddenly. His chair scraped backward. You think this is easy? He shouted. The control was breaking now. The fear was turning into anger. You think he wanted any of this? You have the crown. You have always had everything. He has spent his entire life being the spare, the backup, the one nobody needs until something goes wrong. Charles stood too. His voice remained level, but steel ran through it. That does not give you the right to deceive, to hide, to act as if the rules do not apply to you. We all carry burdens. We all have roles we did not choose. But we do not lie to each other. We do not create secret financial structures and hope nobody notices. Andrew's hands clenched into fists. He was breathing hard. His face had gone red. He did what he had to do, he said through gritted teeth. He did what he needed to survive in this family. When? Charles demanded. When did this start? How long have these accounts existed? Who knew about them? Andrew turned away. He walked to the window where Charles had stood earlier. His reflection looked back at him in the glass, haunted, trapped. He was silent for a long moment. The truth was rising up in his throat like bile. He could feel it coming, could feel the last of his defenses crumbling. It started years ago, he said finally. His voice was hollow now. Defeated, after certain events in my life became public, after he realized he could not trust anyone to protect him, not the family, not the institution, not even you. Charles felt the sting of those words, but he did not let it show. And the accounts, the offshore structures, you set those up alone? Andrew's shoulders sagged. This was it, the moment he had been dreading, the secret beneath the secret. No, he whispered. He did not do it alone. Charles went very still. What do you mean? Andrew turned around. His eyes met Charles's. They were filled with something between shame and defiance. He meant someone helped him. Someone inside the palace. Someone who knew how to move money quietly. How to keep records hidden. How to make sure nothing could be traced back easily. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Charles stared at his uncle. Who? The word came out as barely more than a breath. Andrew looked away. He had said too much. Revealed too much, but there was no taking it back now. The truth was out, partially at least, enough to change everything. He cannot tell him that, Andrew said quietly. Not yet. Not until he understands what he planned to do with this information. Charles felt something crack inside him. This was worse than he had imagined. This was not just about Andrew. This was about someone else, someone still in the palace, someone who had helped hide these secrets. Someone who might still be hiding them. You will tell him, Charles said. His voice was ice now. You will tell him everything. Because this is no longer just about you. This is about the integrity of everyone who serves this family. Everyone who swears loyalty to the crown. Andrew looked at his nephew, at the king, at the man who held his fate in his hands. The fear was back in his eyes, stronger than before, because he knew Charles was right. The truth was coming whether he wanted it to or not. The question was whether he would be the one to speak it or whether it would be dragged out of him piece by piece. The storm had arrived, and it was far bigger than either of them had realized. Keep watching. The name in the shadows. Charles stood frozen. His mind raced through possibilities. Who could Andrew be protecting? Who inside the palace walls had the knowledge and access to create such elaborate financial structures? The silence stretched between them like a chasm growing wider with every passing second. Andrew sank back into his chair. He looked smaller somehow, defeated. The fight had drained out of him. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Sir Malcolm Pemberton. The name hit Charles like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself. Malcolm Pemberton, the former chief financial advisor to the late Queen. A man who had served the royal household for over 20 years. A man trusted with the most sensitive financial matters. A man who had vanished from palace life 7 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. Charles remembered the official story: early retirement due to health concerns, a quiet departure with thanks for faithful service, No fanfare, no ceremony. One day Malcolm was there, the next he was gone. At the time, Charles had been too consumed with his own duties to question it deeply. Now the pieces began to fall into terrible place. "He helped you set this up?" Charles asked. His voice shook despite his efforts to control it. "Pemberton created these accounts?" Andrew nodded slowly. He would not meet Charles's eyes. It was after his problems became public, when the media would not leave me alone, when he felt the family pulling away from him. He went to Malcolm. He told him he needed protection, financial security that could not be touched or questioned or taken away. He understood. He said he could help. Charles walked away from the desk. His legs felt unsteady. This changed everything. This was not just one prince making poor choices. This was systemic, calculated, organized by someone who understood exactly how to hide money within the royal financial structure. Someone who knew every loophole and every blind spot. "Why did he help you?" Charles demanded. "What did he gain from this?" Andrew finally looked up. "Loyalty," he said simply. Malcolm believed the institution had failed that he had been thrown to the wolves while everyone else stayed safe behind palace walls. He thought he deserved protection. He thought someone should actually help instead of just issuing statements and then forgetting he existed. The words stung because they held truth. Charles remembered those dark years, the scandals, the allegations, the family's decision to distance themselves from Andrew. It had been necessary, protective, but it had also been cold. Andrew had been left to face his troubles largely alone. Charles closed his eyes and tried to think clearly. Malcolm Pemberton had been brilliant with numbers, respected, trusted. If he had wanted to hide financial activity, he would have known exactly how to do it. And if he had done it for Andrew, had he done it for others? How deep did this go? "Where is Pemberton now?" Charles asked. Andrew shrugged helplessly. "He do not know. After he retired, we lost contact. That was part of the arrangement. He set everything up and then he disappeared. No trail, no connection. If questions ever arose, he could not implicate him and he could not implicate him." Charles felt sick. This was a conspiracy. Not a political one perhaps, but a conspiracy nonetheless. Two men working together to deceive the royal household, to hide money, to create structures that violated every principle of transparency and honesty the monarchy claimed to uphold. He thought of his mother, the late queen who had trusted Malcolm completely, who had relied on his counsel for decades. Had she known? Had she suspected? Or had Malcolm fooled her too? The thought that someone so close to his mother might have betrayed that trust made Charles's chest tighten with grief and rage. "Did anyone else know?" Charles asked. His voice was quiet now, dangerous. "Anyone else in the palace?" Andrew shook his head quickly. "No, just Malcolm and him, that was the point. The fewer people who knew, the safer it was, the easier to maintain. But someone must have noticed," Charles pressed. "Money moving, accounts being created, paperwork being filed. Malcolm could not have done this completely alone." Andrew looked uncomfortable. He processed things himself. He had that level of access, that level of trust. "Your mother gave him extraordinary authority over financial matters. He used it." Charles walked to the window. Outside, the world continued normally. Guards marched their routes, tourists gathered at the gates. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But inside this room, inside this palace, everything had shifted. The foundation felt unstable. How many other secrets were buried in old files? How many other trusted advisors had abused their positions? How much of what Charles believed about his family and its integrity was built on lies? He thought about his options. He could order a full investigation, tear apart every financial record going back decades, expose everything, let the chips fall where they may. It would be thorough, honest, the right thing to do, but it would also be devastating. The revelations would consume the monarchy. Every newspaper would run the story. Every critic would point to it as proof of corruption. Every conspiracy theorist would spin wild tales. The damage would be enormous, perhaps irreparable, or he could bury it, lock the files away, ensure they were never found again, deal with Andrew privately, accept that Malcolm was gone and beyond reach, protect the institution at the cost of the truth. Charles turned back to Andrew. His uncle looked broken, ashamed, afraid. This man had made terrible choices, had hidden and lied and violated trust, but he was still family, still someone Charles had grown up with, still someone who had been failed by the very institution he belonged to. "What do you want him to do?" Andrew asked quietly. There was no defiance left in him, only surrender. "Whatever you decide, he will accept it." Charles looked at the papers spread across his desk. Evidence of years of deception, proof of betrayal, the truth in black and white. He thought of his duty as king, his responsibility to the crown, his obligation to honesty and integrity. But he also thought of his duty as a human being, as someone who understood that people made mistakes, that circumstances pushed people to desperate choices, that the line between right and wrong was sometimes blurrier than anyone wanted to admit. He took a deep breath. The decision forming in his mind was heavy, so heavy he felt it might crush him, but it was his to make, his burden to carry. He was the king now. These impossible choices came with the crown. He needs time, he said finally. Time to think, time to understand the full scope of what happened, time to decide what serves the monarchy best, what serves justice best, what serves the family best. Andrew nodded. He stood slowly. His movements were those of an old man, though he was not that old. Guilt and fear had aged him years in a single afternoon. Charles watched him walk toward the door. Then he spoke again. His voice was firm, clear, final. But understand this. Whatever he decides, things will change. You will not remain as you are. The life you have been living ends today. How it ends and what comes next depends on choices you make from this moment forward. Andrew paused at the door. He looked back at his nephew, at the king, at the man who now held his entire future in his hands. He understood, he said quietly. Then he left. Charles stood alone in his study. The papers still covered his desk. The truth still stared up at him. And somewhere out there, Malcolm Pemberton lived his quiet life, probably thinking his secrets were safe, probably believing he had gotten away with it. But secrets never stayed buried forever. Charles had learned that now. The only question was what to do when they came to light. Stay with us to find out. The price of the crown. The days following that terrible meeting moved slowly. Time felt heavy inside the palace walls. Charles barely slept. He sat up night after night in his study, surrounded by the damning papers, wrestling with his decision. The weight pressed down on him until he thought he might break beneath it. But kings did not have the luxury of breaking. They carried their burdens whether they wanted to or not. He called trusted advisors into private meetings. Not many. Only those whose loyalty was beyond question. He showed them the records, watched their faces change as understanding dawned, saw their shock mirror his own. Together they began to piece together the full picture of what Malcolm Pemberton had created. The systems he had built, the vulnerabilities he had exploited. It was worse than Charles had initially feared. The structures were complex and deeply embedded in the royal financial operations. But something became clear through those long discussions. These hidden accounts, while deeply troubling, had not been used for anything illegal. The money that flowed through them belonged to Andrew, through inheritance and allowances. It had simply been moved and stored in ways designed to shield it from scrutiny, from questions, from accountability. It was deceptive, yes, dishonest, absolutely, but criminal? That line was harder to draw. So Charles made his decision. It brought him no peace, no satisfaction, only the grim certainty that he was doing what had to be done even though it felt wrong in ways he could not fully articulate. Andrew was summoned again. This time he came quietly, resigned to whatever fate awaited him. Charles did not make him wait. He laid out the terms clearly and without emotion. The hidden accounts would be closed immediately. Every penny would be traced and returned to proper royal funds or declared properly if it truly belonged to Andrew personally. There would be no exceptions, no delays. Andrew nodded. He had expected this, perhaps hoped for worse so that punishment might ease his guilt. But Charles was not finished. You will step back from all remaining public duties, he continued. What little role you still play in royal life ends today. You will retain your title because he cannot strip that from you. But you will live quietly, privately. You will not represent this family in any official capacity ever again. Andrew's face remained still. He had lost so much already over the years. This was simply the final door closing. He understood. He even agreed. What else could he do? Charles continued speaking. His voice was tired now, drained of anger, filled only with sadness. A full internal audit will be conducted. Every financial system will be reviewed. Every loophole will be closed. What Malcolm created will be dismantled piece by piece. It will never happen again. Andrew looked up at his nephew, at the king who was being forced to clean up messes not of his making. He was sorry, he said quietly. The words felt inadequate, empty. But they were all he had. He never meant for any of this to happen. He just wanted to feel safe. Charles met his eyes. Neither man spoke for a long moment. Then Charles nodded slowly. "No," he said simply. "But intentions do not erase consequences, and safety built on deception is no safety at all." Andrew left the palace that day knowing he would never return in the same way. His life as a working royal was over. His relationship with his nephew permanently damaged. He had gambled on secrecy and lost. The price was everything he had left. In the weeks that followed, the palace moved quietly but decisively. The financial audit began. Teams of accountants and lawyers worked through mountains of records. They found the accounts Andrew had mentioned. They found a few others that even he had not known about. Malcolm Pemberton had been thorough, brilliant even in his deception. But no system was perfect. Everything eventually left traces. They tried to locate Malcolm. Charles wanted answers, wanted to understand why a man trusted for decades would betray that trust. But Malcolm had vanished completely. He owned no property under his name, had no listed address, no phone number, no digital footprint. He had prepared for this possibility long ago. He was gone like smoke disappearing into air. Charles had to accept that some questions would never be answered. Some accountability would never be achieved. Malcolm had escaped consequences. At least earthly ones. Charles told himself that would have to be enough. But doubt lingered. It would always linger now. That was the price of the crown. Not the ceremonies or the duties or the public attention. The real price was carrying impossible knowledge, making choices that haunted you, living with consequences that would never fully resolve. Charles turned away from the window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new burdens. That was the nature of leadership. You carried today's weight and prepared for tomorrow's. You did the best you could with impossible situations. You protected what needed protecting. You sacrificed what needed sacrificing. The study fell quiet. The king stood alone with his thoughts. Outside, the palace slept. Tomorrow would come. Life would continue. Secrets would remain buried. And the weight of leadership would press down just as heavily as it always had. This was the price of truth. This was the cost of power. This was what it meant to wear the crown. So what do you think fallout of Andrew's hidden records? Will this revelation bring overdue accountability or leave a fracture the monarchy may never mend? In the end, their choices shape not just their legacy, but the future of the crown itself. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories uncovering the hidden truths behind history's most fascinating figures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.